Good evening. I'm Robert Kesten, Executive Director of Stonewall National Museum, Archive, and Library, based here in Fort Lauderdale. We hope you'll come and visit. Uh, we do an extraordinary amount of programming. These interviews are just one of the things that we do. We're also in the business of traveling exhibitions on the history and culture of the LGBTQ community. We have the world's largest LGBTQ library and one of the very few nationally collecting archives. So any of you who have things that you think are worth preserving for the history and culture of our community, please let us know. We are expanding our archives at this time and really are looking for things that can be exhibited, things that can be shared, things that mean something, because it's so important when there's all this pushback against us that we show just how much we actually contribute to the world. And on top of that, we're in every community. We are in the Black community, in the white community, in all the religious communities. You will not go any place on the planet where there's not members of the LGBTQ plus community. So you always have to remember that. We always do, and know that our history and our culture really has complemented and raised the level of quality of life issues around the world. So now we're going to talk to Ricky Ian Gordon, who is probably one of the, if not the most consummate writer of operas in today's world. He has written on subjects that are historic, that are alliterative, that are extraordinary, exciting, and also, most importantly, creative. His foundation is based on some of the greatest writers in the musical field possibly ever. And I'm sure we can get him to talk about Leonard Bernstein and his interesting relationship with Stephen Sondheim, among others. And then his songs and his music have been sung by some of the great voices, both the Broadway voices and the opera voices. Just knowing that those people were so interested in singing this music gives you another insight into how his music touches people's hearts. Because ultimately, art is about how it impacts you as an individual. So this is the book. It is available. It's Seeing Through, A Chronicle of Sex, Drugs, and Opera. And there's a lot of sex, drugs, and opera in this book. The way it merges and twists throughout the book, it becomes almost, well, not even almost, it becomes impossible to put down because you're going through part of Ricky's life almost while he went through it all those years ago. So, what made you really want to write something that was so out there, so transparent?
Well, I love that you use that word, Robert, because the origin of the title in the first place is the epigraph of the book is a line from Brenda Hillman, the line, the job of the living is to be seen through. So that line, I think, was going to be the epigraph before I even wrote the book. And what happened was Kevin and I, my partner Kevin and I, came up to the country on the day that my opera, Intimate Apparel, and was postponed at Lincoln Center, March 12th, 2020, and my other opera, Garden of the Finzi Continues, was supposed to happen as well. Grapes of Wrath, the Grapes of Wrath was going to happen in Aspen that summer. Everything got postponed. So we came upstate with our little rescue dog, Lucy, and I wanted to do something else. I actually did a lot of music. Like when I first got upstate, I had never seen, when you write a new opera, usually at the most, you might get, say, 7 performances at the opera company. And usually you'll get 1 or 2 dress rehearsals. So it is really harrowing and flying by the seat of your pants. But Intimate Apparel, which was commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera and the Lincoln Center Theater, but it was done at the Lincoln Center Theater. So consequently, we had previews, like many. By the time we closed down on March 12th, we had already been previewing, I don't know, 2 weeks, and we were going to open on the 23rd. So I had never watched an opera of mine that many times. Do you know what I mean? And you just know things about it that you. So when we came upstate, I did all kinds of tinkering with it. For one thing, um, I scored it just for two pianos because it was a smaller theater, and I didn't want to just do. If sometimes if you just do a chamber orchestration, that feels smaller than two pianos, which are very lush and
Right.
full. So we came upstate, and when I was all done, revising Intimate Apparel, I just felt like I need to do something else. And it just occurred to me, I have all these friends that are writers, poets, novelists, Marie Howe, Donna Massini, Nick Flynn, um, Victoria Riddell, Michael Klein. There was a guy named Richard McCann, Martin Moran. And I felt like, what if I just start a writing group and see what it would be like to concentrate on words for a while? And I I asked everybody, and everybody was into it because we were all feeling isolated and alone. And we had already started on Michael Klein's prodding. We had a check-in group. We checked in every week, and it was really valuable. So as soon as we started this writing group, I realized, you know, I wasn't gonna the point wasn't to dazzle these people with my writing style. They're all published 10 times over writers, you know? Um, Marie was the poet laureate of New York. It's like, so I just thought, what do I have to offer? And what do I want to explore? And really, what I wanted to explore was what it would be like to allow myself to be known in a way I had never, ever allowed myself to be known. There are a lot of things in this book I've never told anyone. And it was amazing because I don't think I would even trust that group that way now. But at the time, I was like a fresh baby out of the womb, and it just felt like words. Words were like a whole new power. Notes are by nature abstract, no matter how intimate you are with your. And so I started saying things I had never said. And when I saw the response of the group, like using words like energy, like there's a lot of energy in the writing, or they would laugh, or it was remarkable because it wasn't there was no veil. It was just me telling stories. And the first stories that came out, because I had been in a group for a decade, a men's group for men who had been sexually, it's such a hard word for me to say, abused, molested, whatever you want to call it. I still don't like it. All I can say is, for me, it was for men that had experiences way before they were ready, a lot of them, and who were colored by them for the rest of their life. That's my take on. And the group was unbelievably useful and helpful for me because you have to tell your story. And when I told my story the first day, I I burst into tears. I was wailing, and I was like, who am I crying for? What is this? And so I knew a lot. I knew a lot by the time I started this book about what had happened to me and how it expressed itself in my life. Those were the first things I started writing about. And then, because it was like I was like at FAO Schwartz, and I had discovered a new toy. The toy was words. I started writing about everything. Like, really, Robert, I would I would write on top of a page, Stephen Sondheim. And then and I would lay on my couch in there with I have an iPad. I don't type, so it was like one finger typing millions of pages. I mean, this book was 800 single-spaced pages when I handed it in. And so I once I felt like, "Wow, something's going on here." And then something funny happened that I'll share with you, which was it was February, and I always check my horoscope, Susan Miller's astrology zone. And she said, "Your horoscope this month is unbelievable." And I felt like, oh, so maybe I should just take like a risk, do something dangerous, if the stars are with me, right? And I had met Jonathan Galassi of Farrar, Straus and Giroux, who's the president of Farrar, Straus and Giroux. I had met him because I made an opera out of Frank Bedard, the poet's huge poem, Ellen West, which is written in the form of a script. And it was about this woman who had an eating disorder before there was ever a word for those things, and a Dr. Ludwig Binswanger who examined her, who was her psychiatrist. Anyway, so when there was a dinner for Frank when he won the Pulitzer Prize, that and I sat next to Jonathan at Le Bernardin, and we got along famously. He was there with his husband, Tenoch. And so I just thought, I'm going to send a couple of these chapters to Jonathan. And I really qualified them. I said, like, you don't even have to read these. I'm sending them to you because there seems to be good energy about them. And I will say this, Jonathan, I highly doubt you will see another composer memoir like this. So this is what happened. So I after I sent him these 2 sections, which I believe the first 2 sections, well, no, I don't even remember what I sent him. So I heard back from him pretty soon, and he said, "There's something here." And what I would do is I would just keep going. Don't look back, don't edit, don't just keep going, and because it's so fluid, see what kind of shape it takes. And then he said, "I'd love to send you a book that we just published." And it was John Giorno's new autobiography, the sort of gay poet, not quite beat, but, like very much about how he read his poetry, more than about what it's on the page. And he was handsome and slept with everybody, like Robert Rauschenberg, Andy Warhol, just you name them, he slept with them. Um, uh, so William Burroughs. So he John then so Jonathan sent me this book. I read the book. It was really fun. So in about 2 weeks later, I wrote him what I thought about the book, and I sent him 2 more sections. And then he wrote me back right away, and he said, "I've read everything you've sent me," and he said, "I want to work with you on this book." And he was like, "Do you have an agent? Do you have a literary agent? Call me tomorrow morning. Let's talk." And he spelled it Tawk. And I ran upstairs and screaming and yelling to Kevin that Jonathan Galassi wants, because he's my favorite editor and that's my favorite publisher. I mean, who doesn't want to publish a book with FS&G? You know what I mean? Like I was beside myself. So then the next morning we spoke, and he was the one who said, it seems like he said, "It seems like what you're writing about is sex, addiction, and music." And I was like, "No, no, no, don't say that. I don't want to identify what I'm writing about. I just want to keep going." And he totally understood that, right? But of course, he's edited everyone, including Robert Gottlieb. So in the end, he really knew what he was talking about. So Seeing Through was the title, and then I used that subtitle because I felt like that's what it is. And but Jonathan, it was incredible because once I started sending him stuff, so he said, "Do you have a literary agent?" So my theatrical agent, whose name was Beth Blickers, got me this agent, Lori Liss, who's big. She's with Sterling Literistic, and Lori, she's Rachel Maddow's literary agent. You know, she's tough. Like you can just tell, you hear her voice on the phone, you're like, oh, good, she's like a ball buster. So within like a day, Robert, she had uh, a book contract for me. And I have to say, I was on unemployment and I was shocked. I'm not going to tell you. And it's not some gigantic sum, but I practically thought I would pay them to publish it. So when I ran upstairs screaming again to Kevin, like, they're paying me to write. So, and it was great. Like, just this whole thing started. And then Jonathan, my relationship with him, and it's funny because when I watched that movie, you know, that movie, it was called Turn Every Page. It was about Robert Gottlieb and Robert Caro, and their relationship. In a way, having a relationship with an editor, I never had that before. That was a whole new thing. You don't have an editor as a composer, you know what I mean? Like, and Lori was very proprietous and she said, don't write to him on weekends. Don't, like, she gave me a bunch of rules. And I told Jonathan, he was like, oh, pish tush. And he was like, send me anything you want, anytime of day or night. And I'm telling you something, he would get back to me like 10 minutes later. And it was like a love affair. I mean, I just felt so excited and supported. And oh my God, my writing group was like, what? And I mean, like, I called Nick Flynn and I was like, Nick, I got a publishing contract with Jonathan Galassi, Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. And there was like a pause, and he just goes, straight to the top. And it was unbelievable. And, they were all complaining about how their editors wouldn't get back to them for 8 weeks. And it was like, Jonathan was just so available. I don't think he would be now. It's over. That marriage ended but, so, and as I wrote it, because I would write so much, and the book was going to be, I was writing as much poetry as I was prose. And Jonathan said, what do you think about using poems between the chapters, sorbet during the meal? And I was like, I love that idea. But of course, I just wrote so much. And I didn't know. I didn't like when you say like single spaced, double spaced, I'm like, what does that mean? I just wrote millions of pages and like they were all single spaced. And my friend Michael Klein looked at it and he was like, you sort of need to make this double spaced. It's a little dense on the page. Like there is something called white space, that has so a whole new thing started happening where I would think about pagination, you know what I mean? And enjambment, all my new words. And then I like the things I would learn in that group. Like one day, Nick Flynn had a little party and we were all at the party. And he said something, he was working on a new poem. And I said, what is the poem about? And he was like, Ricky, poems are not about anything. They're about their aboutness. And I was like, okay. I was like, oh, I'm learning all kinds of things. So it was incredible. I had like the best writers in the world, I thought, teaching me everything. And oh my God, it was just so incredible, Robert. And meanwhile, Jonathan would respond. He never talked about cutting anything. He would just he would sort of warmly coax you into whatever he thought the shape the book was naturally taking, right? And like, and sometimes he would do things. I want to give you an example because this is just a beautiful little example. There's there's a chapter in the book. I write about Jeffrey, my partner who passed away in 1996. There was a chapter called After Jeffrey. but it
Yes.
ends with a story about Jeffrey's mother on the day we were going to bury his ashes beneath a star magnolia tree, which is what he wanted. And I was about to drive to Delaware, and she said, I would love one of his t shirts. So I reached into a bag and pulled out a t shirt, and the t shirt said in big blue and yellow letters, "Still here." I had never seen him wear that t shirt. I don't know where he got it from, but when Jonathan sent that chapter back to me, he didn't even ask. The chapter was now titled Still Here. And I loved that he even felt comfortable enough with our relationship that he didn't have to ask me. He just knew that was better, and it was it was so incredible. And so I did. I wrote him this sort of love letter after that Robert Gottlieb, that documentary. And I said, I just can't believe my good fortune to have you in my life in that capacity. And he was very moved. And just to say, and the other day, I'm jumping ahead, and then you can ask the next question. And as you can see, you don't really use one question, and I'll go on for an hour. But the other day, Sunday morning, I was really, really depressed and out of sorts because I knew that they kept saying the next thing was the Times review. And as I have said, I have been revered and I have been reviled. So I was like, what fresh hell is about to happen? And so Kevin was like, "You need to do something. You're horrible this morning." So I went for an 8-mile walk. And when I came home, I was lying on the couch, and Victoria Riddell just sent a little note to the whole group, which is called uh, what is the Virginia Bloom? Oh, Zoomsbury. It's called Zoomsbury. So she goes, "Our very own Ricky," and it was the review from the Times. And I was like, "What? Is this today?" And I said, "Is there anything in it that's going to hurt me? Is it safe to read?" And Michael Klein texted, "It's a rave, you idiot." And I just read it, and I was like, "Holy shit. It's not only good, it's fun to read." It was like a fun review, I thought, like very like she sort of entered the style of the book in a way. Um, so then we had like 50 people, texting back and forth about this review, but boy, did my day improve. And now I'm just relieved. I mean, I feel like, okay, the reviews thing has happened, and now my book is in the world. And the truth is, Robert, I spent 3 weeks recording it at audible.com, right? And as she says it in the review, but Don Katz, who started audible.com, is not only my friend, but he wrote that huge book about my family, Home Fires. So the whole poetry of that I'm recording my book at Audible. Anyway, the day I started walking 9 million miles on Sunday, I thought I better listen to the Audible book and see what people are listening to. And has been so healthy. I've been listening to it, and I have to say, the book is good. I'm really sorry. It's like I'm riveted, and I'm like, you just don't know when you're writing it, and especially when you're recording it. There's You have very little sense of continuity because you have a director. Piper was my director, and she keeps stopping you, and you keep having to cover your stomach with a pillow after you eat or drink, or it's very stop and start. So you don't have a sense of a story being told, and it's been very healthy for me. It has really lifted my spirits. I like the book, thank God, you know what I mean? Um, I was a little, embarrassed reading about some of the sex, and it's very graphic, but it had to be. It had to be. All right, I'm ready for your next question.
There's so many things that I wanted to talk about. I don't know if we'll have time. Uh, One thing I think that's important is you talk about intimate apparel, but people won't know what you're talking about. So what is the opera about? Quickly.
Intimate Apparel is was a very famous play by Lynn Nottage, an African American playwright who's won 2 Pulitzers, the Genius Award, and, I read it. It's a play about a sort of, uh, boarding house for really mostly prostitutes on the Lower East Side in 2000 and in, 1905, and one woman lives there. Her name is Esther, and she lives there because she's a seamstress, and she lives there for free because she makes gorgeous intimate apparel for all the Black prostitutes. And like white women on the Upper East Side find out about her and start hiring her to lure their husbands back into bed. And basically, the story follows Esther, who a man starts writing into her in Act One, from the Panama Canal that he's working on. His letters are very romantic, and they get married at the end of Act One. And we also see her interacting with a Jewish tailor, that it's very clear they love each other, but they can only love each other through fabric. Act Two begins, and George, who has come from the Panama Canal to marry Esther, is a total asshole and nothing like he was in Act One. And so that's a lot of the fireworks start. And Lynn wrote a fantastic play. And I was supposed to be doing something else for the Met. And when I read Lynn's play, I thought, I want to do that. So I approached her and she wanted to do it. But it was commissioned by the Met and the Lincoln Center Theater. And it's the first time they actually collaborated. And the deal was, after the final workshop, the organization that was most right for the opera would decide where they were going to do it. And lucky for us, the Lincoln Center Theater wanted to do it because it ended up being intimate in a way that you really felt it was like a grand opera, but meanwhile you were in a small theater, and it really served the piece. And then luckily it was filmed for PBS, great performances. So there's a beautiful film of it.
Tell me about the people who sing your songs.
Well, I'm very lucky. When I first came to New York from Carnegie Mellon, and though I was quite lost for a long time, I at least knew what I wanted to do. And I was writing songs that sort of blurred the lines between theater and opera, only because that was where I came from. Kurt Weill, like Mahagoni, Three Penny Opera. Um, Mark Blitzstein, who wrote the opera of Regina based on Lillian Hellman's Little Foxes, but also wrote The Cradle Rock. John Carlo Menotti, whose operas played on Broadway. Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, Bernstein's Candide, and Trouble in Tahiti. That was my food growing up. So I was writing that kind of song. So one day a cabaret singer would be singing a song of mine, like a setting of Emily Dickinson's "Will There Really Be Morning?" But then the next thing was Renee Fleming was doing her big Carnegie Hall recital debut, and it was her encore. And I remember John Candor, who he lives on my block and we're friends. And he
Just say
stood
who could John.
John
Most
Candor,
people
who
will
wrote
know, but just say
Cabaret.
it.
John
Right.
Candor of Candor and Ebb, who wrote Cabaret and Chicago and even millions of musicals, and New York, New York. Anyway, he stood up in the aisle when Renee was done singing it and led the audience in an applause. And it was an unbelievable moment. And I started being launched in that way. Then, um, when Jeffrey was very sick, we went to see Carousel, the Rodgers and Hammerstein music at Lincoln Center, which was the first thing Audra McDonald did, the fantastic African American, nice, 6 Tony Award winning singer, actress. And she was in that. And you knew I've my whole life has been about voices. I started going to the opera when I was 8. My mother was a big singer and comedian in the Borscht Belt. I know about voices. When Audra opened her mouth, you knew this is a generation making voice. You will hear a voice like this once in a generation. You just don't, it's like Leonton Price. And when that was over and Jeffrey and I like collapsed at the fountain sobbing because it's so sad, um, my friend Arthur Levy, who's Audra's voice teacher, said, Audra McDonald wants to sing your music. She heard Harlan Blackwell's CD of Your Genius Child, which was a big cycle I did of Langston Hughes poems. The next thing I know, I'm in touch with Audra. Jeffrey dies. I want to do a big concert on his birthday, which was March 10th at Symphony Space, and call it Jeffrey's birthday. And I asked everyone I knew. Audra was in uh, Toronto doing ragtime. It was the tryout. It was ragtime was trying it out in Toronto. And I asked her if she would come to New York and be in this benefit. She said yes. She sang 3 songs that ended up being the first songs that were chosen for her big first CD, Way Back to Paradise. And then we added another of my song, a lullaby. But it just started happening, like, and it's very lucky. I'll tell you what, it's not that, I mean, I know what I'm doing, but because I write songs, which singers become a different kind of star than other instrumentalists very often, and they get a lot of exposure, right? And because very famous singers started singing my music, it put me on the map in a way that was great for larger things like full length operas, musicals, because these little miniatures, 3, 4, 5 minute things, suddenly everyone was hearing them everywhere. I mean, when Audrey's first CD came out, the New York Times called it the CD of the year. So no one ever shut up about it. It was written about everywhere. Um, Obviously, then I wrote a musical in 2003 based on Proust, and I had seen Kelly O'Hara, uh, great Broadway star, and she was starring in a musical called Sweet Smell of Success, which didn't do well, and I think is stupid because I loved it. But Kelly was a miracle. You were like, who is this stunningly beautiful blonde who, by all rights, should not be so complicated, internal? Everything about her was interesting. And I went to Richard Nelson, the playwright who I wrote My Life with Albertine with, and I said, I found Albertine, My Life with Albertine, and we just all had a crush on her. Like, she came in to sing, and I was like, I could barely talk. She just and then Kelly became a dear friend. Victoria Clark, just, Nadine Sierra, who's a big star at the Met now, just Nathan Gunn. Everybody started singing my music, and it really helped launch, it helped push me forward, and thank God, because I really don't know what else I would do with my life except now all I want to do is write memoirs. At least with the half of this book that I cut. So there you go. Is that what did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, and there are more than you just mentioned too. So
Very many. I mean, when I mentioned Harlan Blackwell, I met Harlan Blackwell because I went to London. I went to England because my friend Carol Vaness, who was a big Metropolitan Opera star, was singing Donna Anna and Don Giovanni at Glyndebourne, the summer opera festival. And I had written her a cycle. And meanwhile, Trevor Nunn had directed his big production of Porgy and Bess that was being done at Glyndebourne that summer. And Harlan was Clara, who sings Summertime. And Carol had a big party after the opening, and Harlan Blackwell said to me, "You're going to write something for me." And I came back to New York and wrote Genius Child, this cycle of 10 songs. And this is sort of like this slight way my career was really launched. Robert, you want to just hear one little story? But
Absolutely.
all right, so I had written this choral piece. It was called "Where Do They Go?" And it was going to be part of an AIDS benefit. And I needed a lot of singers. And Tina Landau, my friend, the director, brought over one day like 15 singers to sing this piece. And Jeff Halpern conducted it. And one of these singers, her name was Teresa McCarthy. She sang like an angel. If you ever, she was in Floyd Collins. She recorded for None Such. She took me down to her friend Adam Gettle's loft, and Adam Gettle was Richard Rodgers' grandson. And Adam had a lot of money, so his loft was about as large as, Madison Square Garden. So I didn't even know who he was, but we recorded a bunch of songs at his loft that day. And when we were done, he said, I'm about to do a big benefit for the gay men's health crisis, and I want to present 4 composers. What would you think about being part of it? And I was flattered. I said, I'd love it. And then at the concert, little did I know that about 300 people were going to be there. He put me last. This big star of the Metropolitan Opera named Patricia Schumann sang my song cycle that night. And when it was over, Mary Rodgers, Adam's mother, or Mary Gettle, Richard Rodgers' daughter, and Sheldon Harnick, the lyricist of Fiddler on the Roof, which for Jews is like the New Testament, like fiddler. So they came over to me and Mary was like, how come we don't know who you are? Like, where have you been hiding? And I was about 30 days into sobriety. So I just said, under a rock. So she had me over 2 weeks later, had me play everything for her. Then she had me play everything for the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization. They signed me. They paid for me to live for like 4 years. And meanwhile, then Carolyn premiered this cycle at Carnegie Hall, and RCA was there, and they wanted to record her. So within weeks, I had like a publishing contract, a recording contract, and I just think it's higher power. I think God was like saying stopping drinking was a good idea. Like, now you can, as Faye Dunaway says in that movie, uh Barfly, when she says, "Look, I drink, and when I drink, I move in the wrong direction." That was sort of my story. So once I put down alcohol and drugs, I started moving forward, and it was quickly.
Wow. I mean, you're almost as energetic as the book.
I hope I'm not too energetic, but that's the thing. I can at least lay claim to it. I'm irrepressible.
That's good. That's good. I mean, I'm trying to remember what you were doing when I first met you, but we sort of passed in the night. We never had a conversation.
We
Uh,
kissed. Did we kiss a few times?
I doubt it. I don't think that Daniel was big on sharing.
Oh, got ya. Oh, okay. Well, all right. We were ships that passed in the night, but I definitely liked you, and always remembered you. I mean, it was
I've always remembered you too. I mean, you were memorable in an exciting way. You had a sense, there was a sense about you of creativity that even though I don't know what you were doing, Daniel never told me what you did or what you were doing or anything. Uh, but there was that energy, that really creative force that even in the kitchen, you could feel radiating.
I like
And
that.
and so as your success grew and I continued to follow it, I felt like it was exciting for me
Oh, that's so
seeing you become
nice.
successful.
Well, Robert, just to say, when Daniel, that whole period, I was still drinking and using drugs. And Daniel and I would go buy cocaine from this woman named Faye who lived like in Turtle Bay or something. And you would walk into her apartment and literally there was so much cocaine in the air, you'd get high just from walking in. And Faye did so much cocaine that her hairline like rose about 3 inches. She looked Elizabethan. And so uh, I was still, I was still not ready to just put the toys of childhood down, and because Daniel at one point in 1984, I was going away to conduct in Monte Carlo, this Terry Klausner's nightclub act. And remember, Daniel worked in fashion and he bought me this magnificent um, Armani tuxedo to go conduct in Monte Carlo with. And he would always come home he would be giving me Valentino suits. And oh man, that was good. And but he also, on my birthday that year, he said I had to look out the window at 6 p.m. And when I looked out, there was a huge limousine parked in front of our building. And the limousine took us to, remember J.S. Van Dam's, that really
Yeah.
popular restaurant. It was popular around the time of Odeon. And we had lots of cocaine, lots of champagne in the car. Then we had a chocolate cake after dinner and just drove around and snorted cocaine and drank champagne and ate chocolate. So, yeah, I wouldn't say I was completely dissolute during that period, but I would say that I liked getting high more than I liked pretty much anything else. So it had to go. It had to go. And really, the the reason it had to go was because I was like, there's one, I know I have a gift and I know I can either pursue that or I can pursue drugs and alcohol. They can't coexist. So 1989, I got sober.
So it became a clear choice, and you really did feel that the gift had to win out.
It really had to win out because and I had periods like I remember one night my friend Mary was living with me at the time. And we came home from a dinner party, and I just sat down on the couch and started sobbing. And Mary just said, "What's wrong with you?" And I just said, "My whole life is drinks and dinner and dreams." And I said, "I feel like Hickey in Iceman's Cometh, the Eugene O'Neill play. And Hickey is just all he does is have pipe dreams." And I thought, if I don't stop doing this, I'll never do what I'm supposed to do with my life. I was really scared. So luckily I did, you know, but yes, the dream won out. And really, I have to say, Robert, I could never, I mean, it takes a lot of concentration to write opera. Like, you're basically doing this thing stone by stone over a period of years. So there's the architecture. I think it helped me write this book because you're putting something together from little stones. And I think with this book, when I actually wrote something on the top of a page and then wrote about it, I simply knew instinctively whatever I wrote on the top of that page had enough heat to make me wanna riff about it.
That's an interesting way of doing it, giving yourself a talisman almost.
Exactly, or like, they were prods or, they were definitely totally the motivator, like, just seeing them on top of the page was like, "Here we go."
Now, you also talk, and I don't know why I'm going into this because what you're talking about is probably more interesting, but you talk about a lot of these very, very good looking men from Long Island that you grew up around, who many of them were a little bit older than you. Some of them were dating your sisters,
Or
um,
married to my sisters.
or married to your sister. And they were all worthy of being models, worthy of being uh, photographed, and you found that seems to be a theme also through a lot of those trials and tribulation periods, and many of them were at least supposedly straight.
Well,
So
yeah, I mean,
how did that play with your psyche?
well, all right. First of all, there's a quote in the book, and it's Thomas Mann's Death in Venice, which Benjamin Britten, it was his last opera, and a woman named Fanwy Piper wrote the libretto. And a line from the libretto, which is taken straight from the Mann, is there is indeed in every artist a wanton and treacherous proneness to side with beauty. So I don't know. I think that has always been in me. And when I was little, I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know you could just observe it. I somehow wanted to digest it. I wanted to own it. I wanted to enter it. And I don't know why. I mean, the truth is, those men were, I must have been compelling and charismatic enough at the age of 15 that they wanted to have sex with me, or they were willing to whatever it was, that's what happened. And really, the effect it had was that a lot of things, a lot of impossible fantasies came true for me when I was very young, too young. And so I went into the world as an adult male with desire being attached to the impossible. So for me to finally settle into real relationships with people and give up that fantasy and grieve that fantasy that I wasn't going to find my father, because they were all father substitutes, and we weren't going to get married and sleep together all the time. I mean, the name of the book, the first title of this book was Will You Be My Father? So in that's why it was damaging. And for the record, it's why I have trouble saying they raped me. They I can't, and I talk about this in the book. When there was that documentary about Michael Jackson, Finding Neverland, and about those guys, about what happened to them with him, remember they talk about their confusion because, in a way, what happened with him was what they wanted to happen with him. They He was their hero, and they were doing what he wanted, and so they were making him happy. And so it's hard not to feel that you are the perpetrator of the not the perpetrator, what is the instigator of.
At least you're complicit.
Yes. And obviously, then you grow up and you think, yeah, but these men were like 7, 8, 9, 10 years older than me. They probably shouldn't have been having sex with a 15-year-old, but they did. And, I didn't want the cops to arrest them, or for me, it was about, I have to deal with this, because what happened was I got into a terrible pattern of becoming obsessed with unavailable people. And each time it would be excruciatingly painful, like to the point of I wanted to kill myself. And I would be in and out of those meetings, like Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, um, uh, romantic obsession meetings. I remember one time I read a book by a woman named Pia Melody, and it was called Healing Love Addiction. And I shook while I was reading it. And at that point, I was in an obsession that made me so sick And my sister Sheila came to visit me. I was an artist in residence at the Lyric Opera of Chicago. She came to see me and she was scared for me. And another night, I was out to dinner at a restaurant in Chicago, and I was in such bad shape, I collapsed in the restaurant, and an ambulance had to come and get me. I was so overwrought. And these things, I believe that those obsessions were born out of, I thought I could have what I wanted. And I did get it at a certain point. And, it's that story of, if you give the rat the cheese and it's at door number 3 times, then they will go back to door number 3 for the rest of their lives until they die of starvation because they think it's at door number 3. I was like that. I was pursuing something impossible and excruciating over and over and over again, just refreshing that pain. And by the way, when I say that book was 800 pages and I cut a lot of it, there were about 20 more obsessions in it in detail, including the one that made me so sick. And so, really, Robert, there's a million more things I could say about that, but that's enough. That's what happened for me to
And how,
finally settle into just loving someone in a way that isn't obsession, in a way that isn't impossible, for me to settle into something that's comfortable and life affirming and nourishing and nurturing. Ooh, that was really hard.
how much of that obsession and compulsion goes into the music?
I would say now, I would say all of that energy goes into the right place now. It goes into the music, it goes into the writing, it goes into, I mean, before I wrote this book, I still wrote words. I wrote opera librettos. I have always, it's just that now, Stravinsky said of Le Sacre du Printemps, for those who don't know, The Rite of Spring, the piece that basically changed the entire world of music at the beginning of the 20th century. He said, I am the vessel through which passed Le Sacre. Well, I at one point was able to become the vessel. And that has been very useful. Because now almost no, everything I write is a container for all of it, for my joy, for my grief, for my rage, for my frustration. That is where it goes.
And how do you ultimately decide on what you want to write about? I mean, sometimes it's commissions, but like you said, you were commissioned for one thing and you wrote something else. Uh, so how does that come about?
Well, I read, and for my entire life I've been someone, even when I didn't read, have been obsessed with foreign movies since I was a little boy. I'm filled with ideas, and they're all ideas that have heat for me. So if you tell me you want to pay me to write an opera of the Grapes of Wrath, um, the Grapes of Wrath is great. So eventually I'll say yes once I read it and stop lying and saying I have to reread it because I never read it. But I if you don't tell me an idea, I have a million ideas. And if I don't have them, I know a million ways to find them. I love, I love exploring ideas. Ellen West, the Frank Bedard poem, was something I read. I discovered him after Jeffrey died, and a Michael Klein, again, a poet friend, told me about Frank Bedard. He said, you should explore his work. I had never seen anything like his work. It was like his use of italics, his use of capitals, the way there are different voices in his pieces. So I had been obsessed with that for years, and then it was finally ready to be born. And that's the way it happens. Right after Jeffrey died, I wrote this cycle of poems called Green Sneakers about when he came to um, Houston for the premiere of the opera I wrote for him. I wrote an opera of the Tibetan Book of the Dead because he wanted me to study Buddhism and help him die as a Buddhist. So I set the teachings to music and made him an opera. But when he came there, he got so sick, we had to send him home. And we bought him these sneakers before I sent him home. And years later, I'm in Utah and we're rehearsing The Grapes of Wrath. And I'm meditating one morning. And Eugenia Zuckerman wanted me to be the artist in residence at Bravo Vale Valley Music Festival. And in a meditation, I see this whole opera made out of those poems. So, like, I had to take them out of my deepest cabinet. It's just that's the way it happens, you know. It just you're a participant in your own story, and sometimes the person out there tells you the idea, but for me, oh, like 27, the piece about Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas. Um, Jim Robinson, who was the artistic director of Opera Theater of St. Louis, called me one morning and said, "We want you to write an opera for Stephanie Blythe. She's going to do an opera for us. And we want," and I just said Gertrude Stein because I've always been obsessed with Gertrude Stein since I was in college. And Stephanie is by nature a presider. She's a big personality. She's a big woman. Her voice is the biggest mezzo voice on earth. At that point, it was. And it was just that's who she has to be. That's what it's going to be. So luckily, I'm filled with ideas. You know, after Grapes of Wrath, we were looking for ideas, and one night I wanted to show Kevin this movie by De Sica of the Garden of the Finzi Continis, which I had seen like every 5 years since I saw it when I was 15. And that night I had a like hysterical reaction to it. I could not stop crying. And I realized because of my reaction to it that night, this has to be the next opera. So that's sort of how it happens. You never know where they're going to come from, but they come.
And so they meet a need.
They meet a need exactly. And you know, it's interesting, Robert. A lot of times, though I am not in any way an observant Jew, my Judaism makes its way into my work. And it's almost like to celebrate something I couldn't celebrate when I was a child. Judaism had nothing to give me when I was little. Synagogue was horrible, the most boring thing on earth. Sunday school was horrible. It was not inspiring to me. The word God meant nothing to me. Spirituality, I had to discover those things on my own.
I would think that for a lot of people that's true, but they can conform, and your creative energy was not going to let you be a conformist.
Yeah, I think I'm by nature an iconoclast.
I mean, clearly get but you're also proof of be careful of what you wish for,
Yes, yes.
because you got what you wished for and it didn't always work out the way you wanted it to.
That's true. And by the way, still, you know, people always say to you, "You're so lucky you're doing what you wanted to do with your life." And it's like, it's not quite that simple. I mean, it's like writing music can be excruciatingly miserable, and all of it can be. It's just what's great, and I'm not the first person to say this, is having written. When you've written something and you know when you write an opera like The Grapes of Wrath and suddenly there's 100 people in a room for a rehearsal because you spent all that time, those years, in a room by yourself, and you have created this community, it's very satisfying.
It's a great story. I hope that when this gets posted to the YouTube channel as well as tonight, that people will go out and get the book. Uh,
And Robert, it's out and it's in hardcover now. That's the galley. Do you
I
want to
know
see
what
the
this is.
hardcover? You want to see the big one?
Sure.
All right, hold on. I'll show you.
So while Ricky goes and gets the book, it's called Seeing
I got
Through,
it.
a, a
Here it
Chronicle
is.
of Sex, Drugs, and Opera.
Oh,
That
do I
looks good.
is it backwards? Wait.
No, well,
Oh, there's no way to
no,
do
it's
it.
upside down. No,
Okay.
well, for me, it's the right way. For you,
Oh,
it'll be
okay.
backward.
So this is the book, and it has 16 pages of photos in it. It has photos.
That's what I was wondering.
Yes, it
It's
has
needed
16 pages.
pictures.
Yes. Part of that was when Home Fires came out, which is the book Don Katz wrote about my family in 1992. It was published. People are like, why aren't there photos? So I put them in my book. And Jonathan wanted it to be separated into 8 pages of photographs of people and then 8 pages of productions. So anything I talk about having written, there's a photo of in the book. It's nice.
So now I have to go to a bookstore.
Well, Robert, just give me your address. I'll send you one. I'll sign it for
Okay.
you.
Oh, that would be very nice. Thank you. Thank you. And hopefully I'll get to see you again. It's been
Yes.
a very long time.
It was the 80s, Robert. That was like not even the mid 80s. I think it was like 84, 85.
It probably was. I had just come back from California.
Well, darling, I'm going to tell you something. You look marvelous.
Well, you don't look so bad yourself.
Thank you.
So, I'm Robert Kesten, Executive Director of Stonewall National Museum, Archives, and Library. And this was our conversation with Ricky Ian Gordon, who's Seeing Through a Chronicle of Sex, Drugs, and Opera is available now. You can get it at Amazon and any fine bookstore. Um, we have, as I said, lots of programming. Please visit our website at stonewall-museum.org and come visit us. Right now, we have a replica of the 1968 Stonewall Bar
Yes.
as it appeared right before the police entered the building on June 28th, 1969. Uh, so it's more authentic looking than Stonewall does today. We have the arch and we have the buckets that they washed the glasses in because they had no running water. And just recently, we did the first ever reenactment of the Stonewall Uprising, which we will make a a yearly annual event. So next year it will be on June 28th here in Fort Lauderdale. Come and throw a couple of bricks and we will be opening exhibits in New Orleans and in Topeka, Kansas later this year. If you follow us on our website or get our email blasts, you will see what events we are doing. And always remember that Stonewall is your home away from home. This is where our history and culture lives. So thank you very much. Thank you, Ricky. I will send you an address. It was
Yes.
really good talking to you.
Thank you.
And
Same
I'm
here,
hoping
Robert.
that you'll come down to Florida and we can get one of those operas up here.
I like that idea. Get to work, Robert.
I will.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Have a
All
good
right.
night.
You too.